It was when I realized that I didn't actually have any friends. Not long after graduating from OSU majoring in pharmaceutical sciences, suddenly, as if getting my degree changed me, I was no longer invited to the same parties I used to be invited to. No one had any time for me and everyone was working. I'd schedule a time to chill out and everyone would blow me off last second, flagrantly so. Facebook messages would get no reply. I was a mess, and with college behind me, and my friends being friends in name only, I knew I needed a diagnostic on my life. Home, I said to myself and no one else. I'll go home to Chillicothe to clear my mind. It was a good idea in theory. Hometown food, familiar sights, see my grandparents, away from Columbus. I'd go home to remember where I came from, perhaps learn what I am. Maybe, and I do mean maybe, it would gain insight into the purposelessness I'm feeling. Starting down to Chillicothe, I thought to pack for a road trip, but I realized there wasn't anything I needed. All I did was pack a cooler full of ice and Coke. Listening to Fall Out Boy, yes, I am an adult that enjoys Fall Out Boy, I passed some familiar landmarks on the highway. A specific BP, a U-shaped hotel, a certain rest stop, a big sign that says corn in all caps written in yellow on green. These signs piqued my excitement, but not exactly in a positive way. I just had more tension and energy than I did before. It was a sort of panic. It was a feeling I couldn't diagnose at the time. But when I saw the sign that said, "Welcome to Chillicothe," and I entered town, I began to understand my fears. I'd been worried that Chillicothe had disappeared. In my mind, it had. It was so nebulous. I hadn't been there in so long that it wasn't part of my identity anymore. I must have associated my pseudo-self-induced amnesia with the unwriting of my past. Then I felt gross entering town, only to not recognize anything. There were a ton of antique stores and thrift shops that looked half open. I wasn't sure if they were closed or not. I didn't see anyone around them. I didn't see anyone. Well, I saw people, but very few. I continued straight past a church and some boarded-up buildings until I found a site I recognized. A Dairy Queen that I used to go to every Saturday with my big brother. I passed the benches we'd eat at. I always got butterscotch dipped vanilla, and I couldn't handle the cone without getting my hands sticky. Anyway, the Dairy Queen was shut down now and surrounded in police tape. I figured I'd follow the street to the comic book shop where I used to play Pokemon as a child. As it turns out, the comic book store was vacant. Everything else was the same. The Sack and Save grocery store next to it, the clovers down in the grate, the uneven entrance to the store. But the store was gone. The only comic book store that never treated me like a bother or an outsider. Sure, it was because I spent all my allowance on Pokemon cards, but still, I was treated fairly in there. I had friends in there. As I stood there, mourning the loss of my childhood, I was softly but firmly touched on the shoulder by the palm of a priest. "Are you looking for something?" he asked with a smile and closed eyes. "Sorry, but I'm not religious, sir." He laughed a bit and opened his eyes. "That's not exactly what I meant, son. But perhaps since you mention it, you do seem to be looking for something more out of life." I decided not to answer that. I didn't want to give him anything to preach to me about. He was very unimposing, and with a youthful expression despite his pronounced wrinkles and light white lines of hair around his mouth. I was wondering if the comic book store that used to be here moved or just went out of business. "It's gone now. There aren't many businesses that crop up around here, but slowly but surely, plenty go out of business. Well, that's a shame. It's just the way of things. Isn't that a tad cynical for a man of religion? Nah, I wouldn't say that. I'm just resigned to the way things are. That's why I'm faithful. At least the sack and save's still here. The more things change, the more they stay the same. I tend to agree, son. I tend to agree. Have a blessed day. I took one last heartfelt gaze into that place of memories and hopped back into my car. Cruising around, I remembered just how many abandoned buildings Chillicothe had. I always wondered why such buildings weren't turned into something new. I knew some of them held KKK meetings, according to my mom, but I doubt they were still around. I think they stopped doing that just before I was born. I'm assuming, but I'd bet on it. These buildings really were just left condemned and abandoned. I always wanted to explore them as a child, and that trip, I just wanted better for my hometown. I wanted to go to some place I knew would still be open, a historical site maybe, and the library was very old. The floor in the lobby was dipping unevenly in the center due to the pressure of being around 200 years old. Even though I couldn't rent out any books, it was neat to browse so many old books. There was a small section of more popular and recent books, and by recent, I mean Harry Potter. It was about then that I realized a few people in the library were looking at me. I tried to ignore it, but my eyes caught a rather old librarian calling someone on a landline while looking at me. I figured it was time to go. Feeling a bit embarrassed for some reason, and even a little afraid of the police, I wanted to relax somewhere dark. Diamond Head sounded like the place. It was an Asian restaurant that had very dim lighting. However, it was out of business now. The place had been there since before my parents were born. Before I settled on Rennick's restaurant, I passed parts of the Carlisle building that had been burned and looked condemned. That building was built in the 1880s, and now it was ash. Rennick seemed open, but no one was inside. I waited around and looked at the liquors on the newly installed bar. An elderly woman with poor posture and thick glasses exited from the back.
"Hello, Jimmy,"
she said.
"Long time no see."
"My name is James, actually. Do I know you?"
"I don't know, but I know you. You'll have the onion rings, won't you?" "Wait. No, that was your cousin that liked those."
"You mean Ken?"
"Yeah, little Kenny. What a sad story."
I must have looked perplexed as she told me to have a seat. While I ate, we got to talking, and this lady turned out to be my godmother, whom I had forgotten about. I didn't believe her until she mentioned feeding me cornflake cereal while I was in the bathtub, late for school. I remembered that vividly, but not the woman. She caught me up on the things happening around Chillicothe, and even mentioned some things from my childhood. I didn't know this, but apparently, when I was too young to remember, my parents' apartment caught on fire. But my parents' drug dealer saved me. I wasn't sure if the story was true, but I certainly hoped it wasn't. I hope my parents never did coke, although I wouldn't put it past them. I also found out my estranged cousin was in jail for killing some girl that was visiting from out of town. He was linked to some cases of arson as well, and when the cops finally took him into custody, he started a fire over at the old bus yard. With a full stomach, I was ready to explore some more. This woman was depressing me, but before I left, she asked if I planned on staying in town. I said for the night while near the door. I waited for a reply while she looked at me longingly. She must have been starved for company. I began to think I didn't tip enough. The game shop where I used to spend hours browsing to the dismay of the morbidly obese owner was shut down and vacant. Not a big surprise. But what was that the movie theater nearby it was also shut down. It was the only one in town besides the Majestic, and that one's mostly for stage shows. The parking lot was pretty full, but I really didn't see anyone around besides a group of Amish near a horse and buggy. They were giving me the evil eye as I peered into the closed storefront's glass wall. I never thought much of shunning tactics until I experienced it. It was powerful enough to make me leave quicker than I intended. Driving away, I wondered how something so simple made me leave, and if there was anything else to see that I missed. This whole trip had made me feel not only worse and more depressed, but a little crazy. I didn't know what I was thinking I would find in Chillicothe. Until that point, I had only found loss. Loss of my history. Loss of my memories. When on a whim, I decided to visit my grandparents, and I was saddened even more. But at least I knew I wasn't crazy anymore. I knocked on the door to this little ranch-style house my great-grandfather built. I received no response. I didn't tell them I was coming, and I knew they were both hard of hearing. So I let myself in. The door just sort of popped open when I turned the knob, and there was a latent vomit smell. Before confirming what I knew to be true, I took a moment to cry on the porch. Holding my breath, I confirmed my grandparents were dead. I quickly ran out of the house and retched as the smell took a minute to linger on my person. They were dead, both of them, and no one checked on them. Not my parents. Not their neighbors, not even myself. I knew I wasn't crazy anymore. This town was. Since I left, everything started dying. I quickly ran in and grabbed the phone book off the kitchen counter to find the number for the police station. They were gone, so there was no need for 911. When I called, the police officer that answered said they were busy. I closed the door, despite it not really wanting to close. I drove off, not really paying attention to where I was going. All the feelings I had bottlenecked into apathy with an undercurrent of unhappiness. I began to wonder if being an adult would always be about loss. How do people live like this? Do I need to just suck it up? I was at a loss to properly assess the questions I had. Then a black fence came into view. I parked by it, unsure of why it intrigued me so much. Then I realized I hadn't been focusing on the road because my eyes were focused for the first time in hours on this fence. Looking up at the fence, I saw a visage of a familiar building that wiped away any feelings I had. Like all emotions were void upon entering the gate of this building. It was the Chillicothe preschool. This is where everything started for me. It was just as I remembered it. The same play equipment, same poor houses and old folks' home across the street, same entrance, same exit, and rust and gravel, and it was all the same. There, in the moonless evening, I felt home and safe. I regressed to a time when I wasn't burdened with 10,000 thoughts and certainties. I was in a blissful fog of doubt and discovery. As I explored, I wanted to see inside, so I approached the glass doors and peered in. There, in big, blue bubble letters, read a sign. Welcome class of 2009. That was my high school class. I was almost hyperventilating as I read that, and I felt as though the world's eyes were on me. Turning back, I witnessed 2 eyes and a torch over by the gate. He sauntered over to me, wearing a t-shirt with a faded Cavaliers logo on it, the Chillicothe High School mascot. This place is so wonderful, so much open space for the children to play. Just like inside, no clutter, just bare carpet to explore and learn in. This place kicks off so many lives for so many small ones. A shame it's about to close down. Who are you? Swimming Coyote. Swimming Coyote? I didn't stutter, but I've never minded repeating myself. I'm Swimming Coyote. You don't look Native American. I'm not. Swimming because I like to wander, and Coyote because I have no class. But I can tell you a lot about the ancient religion of this land, as in the Adena tribes rather than the Hopewell. Before either of them, roughly translated, it was known as the Great Spirit of Entropy. It was a being that made sure the soil was constantly renewed and that the power always shifted. It withdrawed favor in the blink of an eye, and never long established a law. Rules moved and the seasons changed due to the Great Spirit. Purging in fall, resting in winter, moving in spring, burning in summer. This was the truth that every ancient person knew. Many have forgotten this truth. Do you now remember it, visitor? How did you know I'm a visitor? He looked at me, waiting for an answer. We're different, we're civilized. We have buildings and hospitals. What about Tiffin and MacArthur and even your own Hopewell? All the schools are closed. The summer is almost over. And the great sleep is coming. I'm not sure what you're talking about, man. Hopewell's closed? That's a shame. Well, I hope you're staying this time. He casually walked past me, moving around the school. I couldn't think of anything to say as he did so. I hadn't heard my old elementary school had closed, so I decided to take a drive. I, after all, had nothing better to do. The night had claimed my vision in the playground around back. With my phone light, I made out broken glass and debris, and dark tarps covering God knows what. Then there were some spare tires and a few skids. All the windows were boarded up good, and the railing, that had been rusty since my childhood, was now twisted and contorted in a manner unsafe for any adult. The basketball court was useless, due to the nets being torn downwards. The school bell, which was a mere decoration when I attended, was now gone, leaving only its apparatus with a slight angle to it, as though the roof were falling in on itself. Most of the courtyard was blocked off with an opaque fence, but strangely there was a moving truck parked on the other side of it. Peeking over, the wheels were gone, and the passenger portion looked like it had seen better days. The fogged glass window tiles on the far side of the school building, the only ones that weren't boarded up, were shattered in places. In such a dying town, I suppose rock throwing is the only pastime teenagers have. The only thing that survived, despite the rust, chipping, wear, and vandalism, was the hard plastic and steel play equipment. The slides on the monkey bars that I spent untold hours on. That I fell and busted my knees on. The bars I grabbed until my hands were raw from friction, and continued to grab then after, even on cold winter mornings. The slides we were discouraged from climbing up and the soft pebbles underneath them. Standing with an uncanny resolve were the square poles that held every slide, platform, and bar in place. I hesitate to call it this, but there was a relief I felt at seeing this equipment survive. I hesitate because I think the only reason it remained was out of laziness. It cost more money to take it down rather than to just leave it up. The school, on the other hand, was now just a shell. I lingered there a while longer. I heard a crackling noise in my ear. It was fuzzy, and it had me spinning in circles trying to locate where it was coming from. I traced it to a telephone toy on the playground. 2 posts opposite each other connected underground via tubes that carried sound. Inspecting one, I heard a clearer version of the sound. I don't think I'm imagining this, but it burned my ear. Then I heard the sound of plywood bending. I saw one of the boards covering a window almost popping out. I crawled into the school and found it adorned with the same carpet and wall decorations as in my childhood, but now faded and covered in an unfathomable amount of dust. Again, utilizing my phone, I could only see scant aspects of my surroundings at the time, so my phone frantically moved to take it all in. Making my way out of the K1 room I found myself in, I moved down the long U-shaped hallway to the computer labs down by the 3rd and 4th grade area. I thought it might hold some intriguing sights. Again, there was the crackling from before. Peeking into the 3rd grade lobby area, I saw a congregation around a campfire. It was about 30 to 50 people crammed in a relatively small space. The fire left a pronounced layer of soot on the subceiling. They spoke no words and uttered no chants, despite wearing normal clothes. They looked like a cult. The smoke from the fire, the smoke began to dance into forms, into images. An image of a baby being carried out of a burning building. Then an image of a baby becoming a man. Then the man burning at the stake. Then, from the ashes rose another baby. And as if the movie ended, and no one wanted to stay for the credits, the mob of people turned to look at the door I was peeking from. Their eyes met mine, as mine jutted across the crowd. There was a priest, and a police officer, people in suits, people in casual clothes. They all waited, leering at me. They only chased after me once I darted down the hall. I was winded the second I started moving, like the smoke and the grease were coating my lungs. I wheezed and coughed, and in the moment, I thought to drop my phone and navigate in the complete darkness. I made a break for the room I thought I entered from, but I didn't see any light from the open window that had no board on it. My eyes stung, so I closed them. They weren't helping. I thought I had enough distance between me and the mob to where I might hide safely for a moment, but my flight or fight sense had me moving without regard for noise. I touched on a board as carefully as I could. I backed up and rammed into it. I barreled outside and landed on my chest. The fall opened my eyes, and there, on the plywood board, I struggled to bring air into my chest. It was as if I was being held underwater, or like I forgot how to breathe. Spitting out a wad of gray mucus, I began to breathe again, looking back at the school. The smoke was rolling out of the window. I made a mad dash for my car. I noticed I was covered in soot. There's no real way of explaining how I decompressed from the whole ordeal. This happened recently, so I still haven't made many friends. But I've tried to make them. I've discontinued my contract with the old phone, and I got a new one with a new number. It was when I realized I couldn't go back to my past. It was when I got a call from my old number.